أهلا وسهلا بكم في صندوق العجائب. رجاء اشتركوا في القناة وفعلوا الجرس حتى تصلكم الأشرطة القادمة. المعذرة على التأخير لأسباب فنية. هذا المساء عندنا حلقة باللغة الإنجليزية بين ثلاثة أشخاص سوف يتكلمون عن النبي محمد والقديس بولس. لا أدري عن ماذا سيتكلمون، ولكن هذه قاعدة القناة، أن نتعلم كل منا من الآخر. لو كنت أعرف كل ما سيقولوه لا حاجة لي للاستماع لهم. فأنا جدا سعيد بالتعرف عليهم. وكعادتي أبدأ بعرض طبعتي العربية للقرآن التي هي جزء مما أسميه ثورة العقول. هذه هي طبعتي العربية للقرآن التي هي جزء مما أسميه ثورة العقول. الكتاب هو بالتسلسل التاريخي يتضمن الرسم السرياني والكوفي والإملائي لأول مرة بالتاريخ، وهنا يذكر مصادر القرآن وأسباب النزول والقراءات المختلفة والناسخ والمنسوخ والمعاني والأخطاء اللغوية والقراءة السريانية والعبرية. أريكم داخل هذا الكتاب. على اليسار عندكم القرآن بالأحرف السريانية، عملا بنظرية أستاذنا لوكسمبير الذي يعتقد أن القرآن كتب أصلا بالأحرف السريانية، وهو من عمل صديقنا نضال رستم. وهنا عندكم القرآن بالرسم الكوفي. هكذا كتبت الكثير من مخطوطات القرآن القديمة، وصعب قراءتها لأن بلا نقاط ولا حركات. أدخلت بعد ذلك له الحركات والنقاط، ونشرت هنا مع علامات الترقيم الحديثة، النقطة، الفاصل وغيرها. وعندكم على اليمين القرآن بالرسم الإملائي. لن أطيل عليكم. أنا جدا سعيد بتقديم ضيوف الثلاث. إذن أخي please we see your screen please. Yes, we see the screen. We don't see you, Mr. Shihab. We don't see you. You have to open. Yes, okay. Please, we don't see Mr. Shihab. Yeah. I would. Here I have. Now again there is a technical problem. I would have preferred that everyone enters on his own account. So we have three guests.
Yes.
Okay. Let us be. This is what we have. Maybe for the next time. I don't see Mr. Shihab. This is a problem.
I'm right here.
Yeah, but yes, but we should say.
When that.
Yeah. Okay. So as usual, we can invite guests to speak about their favorite subject. And here is Pastor Hisham Shihab, a Lebanese, who would like to discuss with Mr. Syed Saboor and another guest. I forgot his name. I will ask him to present the three of them. Present yourself, and then I will leave the channel. I stay there. I hear you. I will follow you completely, but I would like you to feel yourself free, absolutely free. So you say whatever you like, but please don't put us in hell. If you allow me.
We would like you to ask questions after we wrap up, right? You ask questions. That's what we like.
Wait a moment, Mr. Hisham Shihab. I will immediately cut the sound and the image here. I will not be on the screen. So you will speak. Please present each other. Don't speak all together. And introduce the subject. You have 50 minutes to present your subject. Then when you have finished, you just say, we finished. Then I enter again. And there we will ask for questions. If people would like to ask you questions, you will be able to answer them. Please don't interrupt each other. So each one must speak alone. Okay. So please, Pastor Hisham Shihab, you are the main man here conducting the ship. Please do it as you can. I am not any.
Good evening. This is Hisham Shihab. We're speaking from Chicagoland here in the United States of America. My name is Hisham Shihab. I've been on the show before. I teach Islam, and I am a former Muslim who was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood and converted to Christianity in the 1980s after I read Theodore Noldeke and was kind of disillusioned with the Quran, which I had memorized half of it. And I did my graduate studies on Islam and did a master's degree at the American University of Beirut and wrote a PhD dissertation at the University of the Holy Spirit in Jounieh, north of Beirut. Today I am a pastor in Chicagoland and a missionary to the Muslims. I taught Islam for 5 years at a local college here, and I've written many articles on.
Please speak slowly. Not everybody understands English.
Yes, okay.
So speak slowly. We are not in a hurry. It is not the end of the world. So speak slowly so we may understand you. If you don't like to be understood, so speak as you like. But if you like to be understood, please speak slowly. And I disappear again. Please, if I enter and I show you my finger like that, it means I would like to say something. Okay. So goodbye. Good.
Today we have a thorny topic, a thorny subject. موضوع شائك. It's going to be Muhammad and Saint Paul, two visions but two messages. Okay, and this is a very important topic because the Jews and many others and Muslims as well accuse Saint Paul of inventing Christianity. So this is why and this is why they believe those who claim that believe either Saint Paul or Paul of Tarsus kind of distorted the meaning of the Old Testament scriptures to come up with a Jesus Christ, that a Messiah prophesied by the Jewish scriptures hundreds or thousands of years before Jesus Christ appeared on earth. And the Muslims also claim that Saint Paul is the inventor of Christianity to absolve Jesus or Isa in the Quran from being the Son of God and to deny his crucifixion as well. So today we have an expert with us on the subject. Mr. Syed Saboor got his master's degree from University of Illinois in Chicago and is writing a book on the topic. So you cannot be more expert than that. So I'll hand it over to Syed to present the subject now. Syed.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, the topic is, like Brother Hisham said, it was a very thorny issue. And it's for decades, for many decades, you could probably say almost a century, before Muslims, liberal Christian theologians and Many Jewish critics of Christianity have accused Paul, like Brother Hisham has said, of corrupting Christianity, creating a narrative about Christ that was, a body of beliefs that was contrary to what Jesus taught. And this is especially the popular mainstay argument of people like Shabir Ali. Many of you probably know Shabir Ali on YouTube. He debates many Christian scholars like David Wood and others. This is one of the mainstays of his argument that Paul corrupted Christianity. And not only were his views contrary to what Jesus taught, that he was in opposition with the disciples like Peter and James and John. And he gets this from the Acts of the Apostles, because in the Acts of the Apostles, it does mention that there was a conflict to a certain degree, not so much between the disciples, but on the subject of whether or not new believers in Christ should follow the Jewish dietary kashrut laws, which Muslims claim they reaffirm through Islam, and also the circumcision and what have you. And all throughout Paul's epistles, he talks about the necessity of faith, and that the circumcision is a circumcision of the heart, not of the flesh. He doesn't actually say that people who get circumcised from the flesh are not believers, but at the same time, it's not a necessary prerequisite to have faith in Christ. So the argument that Shabir Ali and also people like Rabbi Tovia Singer, he also is a big critic of Paul and Christianity, and he always attacks Paul in his YouTube presentation, saying that he corrupted and distorted the original message of Jesus. One argument that people against Paul use is that Jesus in the gospel said, "Do not think that I've come to abolish the law. I have come to affirm it." So based on that, their reasoning is that that Paul was abolishing the law by saying that you didn't need to get circumcised, or that you didn't have to, that you had to still follow the Jewish, you didn't have to follow the Jewish dietary laws, and that this. Okay, and this somehow Paul was a renegade, distorting the message of Christ and creating a new religion in the process. Now, the problem with all these arguments, and I include this in my book. I'm more than halfway done. I should be done with it shortly. I address the fact that why would Paul do something like this? I mean, the only explanation that anybody could give as to Paul distorting the original message of Jesus and creating a new religion is if his vision was false, or his vision was not from God, but was from the devil. That's the only plausible explanation anybody could have to prove that Paul had this intention of creating a new religion or going against the teachings of Christ that he had stated while he was on earth. But see, the thing is, that's the only plausible explanation. And on the other hand, we have Muhammad. Muhammad also, like Paul, had a vision. Now, Paul had a vision on the road to Damascus. Muhammad had a vision in the cave of Mount Hira. And what I mentioned in my book is this. Muhammad, for one thing, let's address this. Muhammad was definitely in communication with people who were actually considered members of an apostate branch of Christianity, because they did not believe in many of the core teachings of Christianity. And we know that Muhammad went on camel caravan routes to Syria, where he met with a monk by the name of Buhaira. And we know that his first wife, Khadija, her uncle, Warqa bin Nawfal, was a member of this renegade apostate branch of Christianity called the Nestorians. So many scholars have proved correctly that many of Muhammad's views about Christianity were based on many of these apostate branches of Christianity, as well as, how should I put it, apocryphal literature that was in mass circulation, actually, in the Middle East. Like, for example, we know the Nag Hammadi scrolls. There's a Gospel of Thomas. And interestingly enough, in the Quran, in the Quran, like the Bible, does affirm the miracles ascribed to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. But there's one miracle where he turns birds of clay into actual birds. And we know this story is nowhere contained in the four Gospels. However, it's contained in the Gospel of Thomas, which has been rebuked by most Christian scholars in the church as being an apocryphal gospel. It's not to be considered legitimate. Now, why I mention this is because it's it needs to be understood as to the impulses or the impetus for what led Muhammad to do what he did and say what he did, especially about Christ. And if Muslims are going to, and the argument that they use against Paul is that, when Paul had this vision on the road to Damascus, he was the only one who saw this vision. Well, if that's grounds to disprove Paul's vision of a risen Christ, then the same argument actually can be more forcefully used against Muhammad, because Muhammad was the only one who claimed he saw Angel Gabriel in the cave of Mount Hira. Nobody else could corroborate this. And we also know from Acts of the Apostles, there were other disciples of Christ, like Ananias, who was given a dream by our Lord telling him about Paul and how he appeared to Paul. So we do actually have corroboration of Paul's vision on the road to Damascus. And another fundamental difference between Paul's vision and Muhammad's vision, well, Paul never wanted to commit suicide. When Muhammad had these alleged encounters with Gabriel, and we know it wasn't Gabriel, we know who it was actually. If it was anybody, we know actually what it was based on Paul's epistle to the Galatians, because even he said that even Satan can appear as an angel of light. Muhammad wanted to commit suicide. Now, let me ask you this question. Even on the Old Testament, forget Paul. Go to the Old Testament, all the prophets, Ezekiel, all the Moses, all the prophets who had visions of God. Moses, for example, had the vision of our Lord in the book of Exodus in the burning bush. Did any of them have this desire to commit suicide? No. Muhammad did, though. So this is another fundamental difference between the vision of Paul and the vision of Muhammad. But then it goes back to the core of my reasoning, is that, again, Paul would have no really cause to want to diabolically create, which is what they claim, what Muslims and many critics of Christianity claim, this diabolically create a new religion which was at variance with the teachings of Jesus, unless, of course, he was being misled by the devil. Again, that's the only argument you could raise, because Paul suffered for his faith. And on the other hand, Muslims like to claim, well, Muhammad suffered, but it was a momentary suffering, because in reality, if you look at the Sirah, the biography of Muhammad did not really suffer for preaching his faith of Islam. He actually enacted suffering on other people. This is recorded all throughout his Sirah, all the battles he fought, all the men who he beheaded. And this is also another fundamental difference between Paul and Muhammad, I note in my book. When Paul became a believer in Christ, accepted him as a Messiah, Paul, before his conversion, and incidentally, Paul never claimed that he was sinless. He said, I'm chief of sinners. However, he humbled himself and he renounced violence. A fundamental difference is Muhammad, when he became a prophet, did he renounce violence? No, he did the opposite. Muhammad embraced violence. This is something I make very clear in my book, a major fundamental difference between these two men. And another argument I make is this. The fact is, the other disciples, first of all, Another claim that people make against Paul, and this is very popular, is that Paul was under the influence of pagan Hellenistic philosophy. That he was from Tarsus in Cilicia. And this is an argument, for example, there was a very popular book in the 1980s written by Chaim Maccoby. He was a Jewish Talmudic scholar called The Mythmaker, Paul and the Invention of Christianity. It was a very popular book at this time because at that time there were even many liberal Christian theologians who also believed this nonsense that Paul was, diabolically, he created a new religion and he was at variance with Christ's teachings. So this book was very popular among them. And Maccoby makes an argument that Paul was, under the influence of Hellenistic philosophy. He knew about the pre-Christian gods who died and rose again, and he used these stories to create his narrative of Christ. And again, it doesn't make any sense that he would do such a thing, because we know from the Old Testament, the book of Isaiah, the Messiah was to die. He would rise again. These are the prophecies in the Old Testament. And Paul, throughout his epistles, he quotes from the Old Testament ad nauseum. Maybe that's a bad word to use, ad nauseum. Let's just say he quotes in as much as he can from the Old Testament to basically talk about Christ's life on earth, that he was the Messiah prophesied in the Old Testament. He died for mankind's iniquities. He served as the ultimate sacrifice. He was, and also the Gospels maintain all the rest of the prophecies in the Old Testament concerning the Messiah. So again, there's all these connections that non-Christian as well as even liberal Christian theologians try to connect to prove that Paul created a new religion, or that he was under the influence of pagan Hellenistic philosophy. It doesn't make any sense. And also, furthermore, Paul never came to be a deity. He never claimed to be God. And all throughout Acts of his Apostles, during his missionary travels, he condemned the Greeks for their idolatrous behavior. He condemned them for worshiping idols and doing, engaging in their various pagan practices. So to believe this argument that Paul was under the influence of paganism to create a new religion doesn't make any sense, when he himself condemned the Greeks and the Romans repeatedly for their pagan beliefs and practices. And then I also make a note that Muhammad, on the other hand, he actually borrowed from the pagan practices that were prevalent in the 7th century Arabia. For example, the Muslim adoration of the Kaaba has been proven by many scholars to be a vestige of pre-Islamic paganism. The pre-Islamic Arabs used to, basically revere stones, large stones. For example, when they discovered Petra, they discovered huge stone megaliths, and the Nabatean Arabs who built Petra used to worship large stone edifices. So this was a common idolatrous practice all throughout 7th century Arabia. So if anybody was under the influence of paganism, it wasn't Paul, it was Muhammad. And again, even liberal Christian thinkers like
You're talking about the Kaaba and the black stone, right?
Yes, correct.
Because
the
need to
right. The Kaaba, the black stone, is a vestige of the pre-Islamic pagan worship. And the Quraysh tribe, they had 360 idols in the Kaaba. And also even liberal Christian thinkers like Karen Armstrong, who actually wrote a book defending Islam, incidentally. Yeah. She even has come out with a book defending Paul, attacking those who say that Paul created a new religion, that his teachings were at variance with the teachings of Christ. And she's not even a conservative Christian thinker. In fact, Karen Armstrong is an admitted atheist now. She used to be a former nun. And she's written several books on the topic of religion, on Islam, on Christianity, Judaism, as well as religion in general, religious visions and experiences. And she even discounts this idea that Paul, went out to diabolically create a new religion. And another argument that Muslims use against Paul is based on an apocryphal a book called The Gospel of Barnabas. Now, the Gospel of Barnabas has been a favorite tool of used to be a favorite tool even among reputable Muslim scholars, but now they don't even use that book because they know it's a 14th century fraud, because it quotes Dante's what was it? Dante, he wrote
the Divine Comedy.
Yeah, the Divine Comedy. It quotes the Divine Comedy, even contradicts the Quran. The Quran says there's 7 heavens. I think the Gospel of Barnabas says there are 9 heavens. It's something along the lines of that contradiction. One moment, sorry about this.
Yeah, I'll since Syed is a little bit needs a break here, I'll pose a question to Daryl Pack. Daryl is an Arabist. He speaks Arabic and spent 13 years in North Africa, and he's a pastor.
Well, let me actually continue. This is a very important point.
Yeah.
Let me before we get Daryl on.
Okay.
Sorry, I was fortunately rudely interrupted on that side, not by my friends here. But I wanted to. So even Christian, even liberal, if Karen Armstrong even defends Paul, we know that these arguments they are baseless, because again, there's no possible reasoning for Paul for wanting to create a new religion. He just had no intention to do so. And again, the only argument you could use is if he was led by the devil. And the same argument could be more forcibly used against Muhammad. And also, I make it very clear in my book that the first council in Christian history, the Jerusalem Council, affirmed the rules regarding the Torah, that it was not necessary to be circumscribed or for that circumcised or follow the Jewish dietary rules. So it wasn't just Paul advocating this. A lot of disciples were affirmed on this point of view. And also, we have the vision of Peter in Acts of the Apostles, where he had the dream where the angel of God came to him and told him, come slay and eat. And he said, nothing uncommon has entered my mouth. And the angel said, don't call uncommon what God has cleansed. So we have other disciples who affirm the same line of reasoning that Paul did. So again, these are baseless accusations. But again, I would like Brother Hisham to introduce Daryl.
Yeah, Daryl Pack is an Arabist and a pastor. He spent 13 years in North Africa and Spain, and he speaks Arabic fluent, especially Moroccan dialect, and he reads those yellow books, old yellow books that even Arabs do not read, and he has written many articles on topics of Islam and Christianity as well, and we are pleased to have him today with us. Daryl, I'll ask you a question. Paul claims that he was caught to heaven, to the third heaven, while also we have something similar in Muhammad's biography, that Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj. How do you kind of analyze and compare or contrast these two experiences that both men, if I can say, claimed?
Okay. Well, if you'll remember precisely, Paul says he knew a man that this had happened. But we, as a whole, Christians have said, well, he's talking about himself, but the text specifically says he's talking about someone else. So probably you need to recognize that Paul's becoming an apostle initiated a life of suffering for him.
Mm-hmm.
Muhammad's call to be Rasulullah initiated a kind of power, a sulta from every angle.
Mm-hmm.
So then you see the Ghazwat Rasul or Ghazwat Nabi.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see anything like the Ghazwat of the Apostle Paul.
Yeah, you have the trips of Paul where he was chained and sent to Rome. Yeah,
but Ghazwat are different than trips, right?
Yeah, right. But he did plant churches. So, how can you interpret Isra and Mi'raj according to Christian sources? If we want to analyze the origin of Isra and Mi'raj, and many theologians said Paul was humble. This is why he said, "I know a man." And I mean, he didn't specify, but nevertheless,
a lot of Christians do think Paul was talking about himself.
Yeah.
And I think that's very possible. But you'll notice he doesn't make any kind of claim, أنا كنت في السماوات ولذلك أنا عندي منصب high, important
position. Yeah.
So I think the next thing we have to remember is, as our brother Saboor said, when Muhammad, there is this fatrat, or the inqita al-wahi, where he had seen Gabriel, then he didn't see Gabriel for a while, and Muhammad went on a mountain to throw himself off. So we have to remember something about the psychology of Muhammad, that we don't have any similar psychology with Paul, or really anyone, I think, that we know in the New Testament. When Muhammad was still a young boy, maybe he had 4 years old, not had 4 years old, was 4 years old.
Yeah.
He was playing with the children of Mumarrite Halima.
Yeah, his nurse, Halima Sadiya, yeah.
And he went around behind a building, and his little friends left. And what Muhammad claims happened was that 2 men put him down on the ground, cut open his chest with a golden knife, pulled out his heart, plucked a black dot from his heart, washed it in snow in a golden laver, and then replaced it. So whatever you think that is, you don't think it happened physically. So also Muhammad's Miraj, whatever it was, I think, like this earlier experience, it was not something that happened physically.
How much similar the Isra and Mi'raj to the experiences by Enoch, the old prophet in the Old Testament?
I think that we don't really know, because we don't have hardly any information about Enoch's experience until it's connected to him no longer being on earth.
Yeah.
So that's not like Muhammad's. I think Muhammad's experiences reflect his strange psychology, thinking that his heart was taken out by an angel.
Yeah.
Then later being suicidal. And let's think of one more situation. It's not very noticeable, but if you're reading the Quran, you'll run into this passage where Allah tells the Muslims, hey, don't bother Muhammad at his house.
Yes, right.
Okay, so you're a married adult man, and you're always busy. People are always calling you. I happen to know that.
Yeah.
You're an adult man and a businessman. Can either of you imagine not having the strength of whatever you call it, strength of disposition or personality, to tell people, look, don't come visit during hour this and hour that. I'll be busy with my wife.
But I mean, there's an argument that Muhammad was gentle, and they used to come and shout. And this is, I mean, how Arabs do it in the Middle East. In the civil war in Lebanon, they used to come and shoot in the air if they want to see somebody. I mean, so there's an argument against that. My next question is, the Old Testament, the theologians say there is a dirty ditch between our time and the time of the Old Testament was written. And the Old Testament, maybe like the Quran, Hammal Awjuh, as they say. Couldn't, St. Paul have misinterpreted the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah in the Old Testament, and used, the topos, if I can say, to give legitimacy to the suffering of Jesus and make him the Jewish Messiah? I know this is a difficult question, but I would like to.
It is, of course, possible that Boulos misunderstood these Old Testament passages. You have to remember, though, that was his training.
Mm-hmm.
He trained under Gamaliel.
Yeah.
And so Paul misunderstanding him wouldn't be like an American guy misunderstanding him. Right. This was his expertise. Maybe he misunderstood, but he didn't distort. Let's notice, for an example, that Paul يتناول قضية القداس, يعني the Eucharist.
Yeah, you mean the worship service during his time?
No, the giving of
the Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
The Lord's Supper.
The Lord's Supper. Asha Rabbani.
Yes.
Okay, so Paul deals with that.
Yes.
And Muhammad deals with it. Or Katib al-Quran يتناول نفس المسألة. So in the treatment that Paul gives us, he follows specifically what is written already in the Gospels. What the writer of the Quran does is brings a quite new story. Can your Lord bring
Al-Ma'idah?
Yeah. So that's not in the Gospels. Paul is commenting on the Old Testament. Paul is commenting on the Gospels. Muhammad is substituting his plan or vision or understanding for the Gospels, especially, and to a lesser extent, the Old Testament.
Right.
So can I make a statement that Islam is not a continuation of the previous religions?
It's absolutely not.
This leads me to another question, maybe difficult for you. The letters of Paul were written in around 50 AD before the Gospels. Okay, so the claim here is that maybe the Gospels took from the epistles of Saint Paul. They call them epistles, the letters. This is a Christian, term for them, epistle, which is Greek. The letters of Paul, 7 of them we're dead sure that he wrote. He wrote 13 letters, and couldn't really, Saint Paul have, because he wrote the epistles before the Gospels. Couldn't have the writers of the Gospels, Matthew, Luke, Mark, and John, took from St. Paul the theology and the interpretation.
All right, let me tell you two things about that. First, remember in the book of Acts, the Apostle Paul, because he was concerned not to what he called run in vain, he took his message back to Jerusalem and submits it to Peter and James and John to see if they have anything that they have to correct about his message. So Paul was already alert to the fact that he needed confirmation, not from ahlam wa awham, but from the people who knew Christ before him. But you do not find anywhere in the Gospels where any one of the writers of the Gospels say, well, Rasul Boulos.
According to St. Paul,
right.
No one in the Gospels has that.
Right, and the Gospels were not written by Paul.
Yes, right.
Yeah, that's another thing that has.
But Luke was a disciple of Paul.
Right.
Yeah.
Only Luke.
So when you say Luke is a disciple of Paul, we have to remember that Paul specifically says, "Follow me as I follow Christ." He's not setting himself up as a new authority. He's submitted to the church in Jerusalem. And Paul is not a guy who's shy to contradict authorities if he needs to. Remember, he rebukes Peter when we find it talked about in Galatians. Peter went and hung out with Paul and some of the Gentile Christians. And when those Gentile Christians and Peter were together, he treated them as equals. Then some other Jewish Christians came, and Peter was then kind of embarrassed to be hanging out with these Gentiles. So much did he irk Paul. Paul rebuked him to his face, and later even Barnabas is pulled away from treating. So the only thing that Paul brings that's new is the revelation that there is no longer a line of division between the Gentiles and the Jews in their relationship to God through Christ.
Right.
That they're made one body. So Paul doesn't have a new message about Jesus. He has a new message about the covenant people. Are the covenant people just Jews, or can Gentiles be grafted in?
Right.
And he's very clear. Gentiles can be grafted in through Christ.
Yeah, like he says in Galatians, there's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, free nor bond, for you're all one in Christ.
I'll
Jesus.
ask you both a difficult question. Remember in Acts 17 when Paul saw if I can call it, an empty space for a God, and told them, this is the God that you don't know, that's really the God we know. And do you think Muhammad did the same thing with Allah? Because Allah was one of the gods, in Mecca.
Yes, I think that's exactly it. If we go back to before
lifted
Islam,
up Allah to this rank that he is the only one God, and even though Allah and Lat really have some common linguistic origins, if I can say, and Lat was a goddess of fertility really in Arabia, but that's another question really, or another issue. So how do you talk, both of you? Let's begin with Syed, if you have any insights on that.
Yeah, definitely. This is a very important point because, there were 360 idols in the Kaaba, and Muhammad, interestingly enough, he did use one of those. He did lift up one of those deities because, keep in mind, you look at the religion of Islam. Muhammad created a religion that would essentially appeal to anybody, in the sense that it would appeal, for example, to the Jews, because he borrowed from Judaism. He took the kashrut laws. He took the circumcision. He allowed it to be manifested in Islam. He revered cheeses. This is a point that Muslims love to say, that that in the Quran, cheeses is mentioned more times than Muhammad, and he is, but Muhammad didn't mention it more times to pay homage to Christ, rather to lure Christians into Islam. And then also he borrowed from pagan sources, and he borrowed from the Sabians and from other sects. So yes, I mean, this is a very important point, because in order to appeal to the Quraysh, he had to bring up and elevate one of their deities that they were already worshiping.
Good. What about you, Darrell?
I want to note, following up on what he just said about the Quraysh, and then the leader of the Muslim community stays in the Quraysh tribe literally for generations.
Right.
So there's that political side to that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he it's just like one argument. Actually, you do interesting thing you made about politics, and actually this goes into, I don't mean to digress, but it goes back into another major facet of my book when I compare Paul and Muhammad.
Yeah.
It's about their sexual behavior, and this has to be talked about, because I understand many Muslims will get very incensed and offended about what I'm about to say, but it's the truth. because Muhammad had more wives than his own revelation dictated. He had 11 wives. And Muslims, and whenever we as Christians or any other group of people, secular people, say, well, your prophet had more than 4 wives. Why? And they'll always say, well, it's for political reasons. He married Aisha because she was a daughter of Abu Bakr, one of his close companions, to cement political ties. Or that one of his wives, for example, Hafsa, was Jewish. Maryam, she was a Christian slave girl from Egypt. Safiya. Yeah. And there was Maryam. She was a Christian slave girl.
Yeah.
So they say, well, this is again to cement political ties. And when I hear that, I cringe in laughter because did he marry Zainab to cement political ties? Why did he marry Zainab?
Zainab bin Jahsh, the wife of his adopted son, you mean?
Right, Syed, a wife of his adopted son.
She was a relative of his as well.
Yeah.
So just to comment here, most of his wives were from the same tribe, actually, except Safiya was Jew.
And Maryam was Egyptian.
And Maria, the Copt, was a slave girl given to him as a gift.
Right.
So there is no cementing any tribal connections here.
No, not at all. And even the hadith mentions that the reason why he married Zainab was when he saw her unclothed.
And the Quran.
Yeah, and the Quran too mentions it, that he was captivated by her beauty. There's no cementing of political ties.
And remember, with Safiya, there's no cementing of political ties.
She killed her husband,
because he destroyed her tribe.
Yeah, Jewish tribe. Yeah, they murdered all of them. All the men were beheaded.
So there's no cementing possible.
Right. And, again, I want to make it very clear, Paul, for one thing, never claimed he was sinless. He said, I am chief of sinners. But as a true repentative man, a man who repents for what his past behavior, he bemoaned the fact that he used violence against Christians.
And he said, I don't deserve to be called an apostle of Christ because I persecuted the church.
Right. And then Muhammad, on the other hand, Muslims claim was sinless. Well, it's very difficult to believe because even we know for a fact, even from the Islamic literature, Muhammad did commit sins. And the Muslim theology is that all prophets were sinless. And this is a contradiction again. The Quran says that Adam sinned. Adam was a prophet according to Islam. So there you have a contradiction. But again, going back to my point, it's not to say that marriage, if Paul was married, that would make him any less a disciple of Christ. Paul, on the contrary, he said that it is good for a man not to touch a woman, but in order to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, every woman her own husband.
Right.
So he extolled marriage. But we know from the life of Paul, he was never married, and he did not have multiple wives. And in addition to having multiple wives, Muhammad also had multiple concubines. The practices in the Quran, and Brother Hisham can help me with the Arabic, and as well as Brother Daryl, the concept of what your right hand possesses in the Quran.
That is a hideous phrase that basically equals a sabaya or something close to what we would call prisoners of war.
Mm-hmm. I just want to point out, to be fair, that Muslims say prophets are infallible, ma'soom, not sinless, which is maybe kind of almost the same meaning. But and even though Muhammad said, God forgive my present, past, and future sins, so لنغفر لك ما تقدم من ذنبك وما تأخر in the Quran. So it means he sinned, but he is forgiven, So and they believe that there are grave sins, kaba'ir, and minor sins, sagha'ir. So there's a differentiation, but infallibility, al-isma, doesn't include minor sins, they believe. Like when the blind man came and asked him, etc. It's kind of considered a minor sin too.
Right.
Kind of.
So I'd like to say something that goes back to what Brother Saboor said earlier. Syed, you mentioned the political connections to Muhammad's marriages. But earlier than that, the picking of Mecca, he didn't have to pick Mecca, could have picked elsewhere. He picked Mecca, obviously, because it was important to the Quraysh tribe.
Yeah.
And they had a long history. Even when there were infidels, they would travel around the Kaaba, Labbaik.
Yeah.
So why do the Muslims today circumambulate Mecca? Does God live in Mecca? They say it's Beit Allah. Hal Beit Allah for Beit Ams Filil.
Well, that's another issue. I think we need to focus on Paul and Muhammad.
All right, then let me do that.
Contrast, if you can.
If you think of how Paul deals with the communion for Al-Qaddas, he specifically quotes what we have in the Gospels. Wallah yadayf fikra
It doesn't add anything.
ولكن كاتب القرآن, he has a completely different story. Can your Lord send down a and then at the end Jesus says that God is خير الرازقين. Okay, nice, but not what was in the Gospels.
No,
it's not an offensive story, but it is not what the Gospels said. Paul reiterates the Gospels. Muhammad does not.
Yeah. We need 5 minutes now from Syed to wrap up the discussion and give us the main points, the conclusion, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so going back to a lot of the points that I made earlier, and then I'm also expand on some other points I made. I'm making this book. Again, the idea that both Paul and Muhammad had visions. Paul had a vision on the road to Damascus. He didn't want to commit suicide. Muhammad had a vision. He wanted to commit suicide. Muhammad's vision was not corroborated by anybody. Paul, although his initial vision could not be corroborated by anybody, however, we have the testimony of other disciples and Ananias that he did have a vision. The idea that Paul created a new religion, the only explanation is if he was being truly led by the devil. And then we have the fact that Muhammad, was not really, did create a new religion and wasn't really a continuation of the old religion. And one point that I want to also make is, if Islam is truly a continuation of the original message delivered to Moses and Abraham, then Muslims should circumcise their children on the 8th day, as Jews do. Yeah. They should follow all the Jewish festivals. They should be celebrating Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot. Do they do that? No. And incidentally, Muslims eat camel meat. In the Old Testament, haram. In the Torah, it's forbidden to eat camel meat. So this idea that Islam is a continuation of everything in the Old Testament doesn't make any sense, unless you want to believe also the Islamic argument that it was not just the Christians who erred, but the Jews who erred too, that somehow their scriptures were corrupted. And it's funny because whenever Muslims want to defend the person of Muhammad or Islam, they always use the Old Testament. They say in the book of Deuteronomy, it prophesizes Muhammad's coming. Well, you believe the Jewish and Christian scriptures were corrupted. You can't pick and choose and say, oh, this refers to Muhammad. But how do we know this refers to Muhammad? You yourself said that their scriptures were corrupted. And then also they make all these other claims, like, for example, that, the prophets in the Old Testament had multiple wives to defend Muhammad having more than one wife. Well, nowhere in the Old Testament did it tell Solomon that having 700 wives was a good thing. Okay. When David committed indiscretion with Bathsheba, God, punished David. He took the life of the child born out of that union. He severely, even though David was beloved of God, God condemned David for not only the adultery but having Bathsheba's husband Uriah killed in battle.
Yes.
So you can't, it's just nonsensical. The way they try to justify Muhammad's behavior based on the Old Testament. And once again, a major argument that we have to dispel, that Paul did not use Hellenism in his narrative of Christ, because Paul severely condemned the Greeks and the Romans for their idolatrous behavior. There's one verse he says, his criticism of the pagans of his day. He says the Jews seek after a sign and the Greeks seek after wisdom, but I preach Christ crucified, wisdom to the Greeks and a stumbling block to the Jews. So Paul was not in the habit of borrowing from the Hellenistic philosophy. And again, it goes back to the point: why would he have to? What purpose would have served for him to use Hellenistic philosophy? It doesn't make any sense, because he was persecuted by the pagans. Why would he use their philosophy?
And we can actually see his argument. It's based on his interpretation of the Old Testament passages and the Gospels.
Right.
Daryl, what's the evidence that Paul read the same Tanakh, Old Testament scriptures that we have in our hands today?
There's multiple evidences. The first one that's easiest that everybody can do, even if you can't read Hebrew, just go to your New Testament and take a highlighter and write down every place where Paul quotes, where he says the prophets say or anything like that, and then go look it up, see where it's from.
Do we have an archaeological evidence that shows that St. Paul read the same scriptures, Jewish scriptures, that we have today in our hands?
What do you mean archaeological evidence? A photo or a monument?
Manuscripts.
Well, the manuscripts that we have, the Jewish manuscripts that we have that are probably the easiest, most accessible to the non-specialist, is to go ahead and get the Septuagint. Okay. You can probably go get a Septuagint at almost any nice bookstore in your town.
What Just about the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls are a very interesting highlight, but they don't have everything that was in the...
Except the Book of Esther, actually. They have most of all the Old Testament except the Book of Esther. So do you have an idea when the Dead Scrolls were written?
They were definitely written way before any of the New Testament literature. We're talking about probably 500 or 600 years before Christ.
So basically, St. Paul read the same, Jewish scriptures that we have today in our hands.
Right. So if you have a question about it, just compare what he quotes. And the challenge of the authority and authenticity of the Old Testament does not touch very much the Muhammad Paul question, because can you show me where Muhammad is correctly interpreting the Old Testament or the New Testament?
No,
we cannot.
No. And then thinking about Muhammad's again, his knowledge of Christianity, Judaism was based on skewered sources. It wasn't based on any legitimate sources. Like, for example, in the Quran, it attacks the concept of the Trinity, but it says it includes Mary in the Trinity. When we know even Christians, the majority of Christians in Muhammad's days consider the Trinity to be Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Sure. So basically, this is one of the differences between Paul and Muhammad. Paul based his argument on authentic sources that were mainstream, while Muhammad maybe based his whoever wrote or compiled the Quran based his writings on oral traditions or heretic writings or heretic
or perhaps
theological ideas
also
of Christ and
about
Christianity.
Oham Nafsaniya. For example, look at how Muhammad in the Hadith says that Christ is the closest to him.
Mm-hmm.
One of the main reasons that Muhammad wants to assert about the Messiah's crucifixion, maqataluhu, masalabahu, walakin shubih lahum.
Yes.
One of the reasons that's so important for him is he wants to assure the Muslims, God isn't going to let me die about this message I'm preaching.
Allah protects
I'm
us.
going to be victorious, not
because as Thomas Carlyle said, Islam is a worship of heroes.
Yeah, so he's got a strong psychological need for God to be protecting him and making him a victorious warrior.
So this will be our next topic. We turn it now to Dr. Sami Deeb for questions and analysis.
Okay, thank you, my dear guests, for this evening. I would like to ask people who are on the chat to intervene if they like to ask questions. Now, just to tell you that as you have here a specialist for the Quranic and Islamic studies, that I am preparing now an critical edition, Arabic critical edition of the Quran. Besides my English, Italian, and French translation of the Quran. I may be the only one who translated the Quran in 3 languages. Now my edition in Arabic, which I show you, it can be downloaded from academia. Here it is. Here it is, my edition of the Quran. From time to time, I update it. So you can have it there, free of charge. Then, if you like to do that, I will just show you. I will just show you some pages from the inside. So I am waiting for people who would like to intervene. For this book, I wrote a large introduction of about 150 pages. An introduction insisting on the sources of the Quran and even linguistic errors in the Quran, Arabic linguistic errors. And this book is the first time produces the Syriac Quran, written by a Syrian.
Wow.
Yes, this is the first time that you have the Quran in Syriac letters. According to the theory of our friend Professor Luxemburg, who pretends that the Quran has been written first in Syriac letters, and thereafter it had been transferred to Arabic letter, the Kufi one. And I may show you maybe here better if I go to here. You have on the left side the Quran in Syriac. Here you have the Quran in Syriac, and here you have the Quran in Kufi letters, and here the Ottoman style, and here the modern Arabic text. So this is an Arabic edition in 4 columns, Syriac, Kufic, Ottoman, and modern Arabic. This is the first time that you have the Quran published in Kufic letters. As you can see it in the old manuscripts of the Quran, Sana'a, and other manuscripts. As you see, it's very difficult to read this text as it has no punctuation, no accent, and so on, which have been introduced later. And this may help people to learn how to read old manuscripts using this one. This is a large book of more than 1,300 pages, more than 6,000 footnotes, indicating the sources of the Quran. From the Bible, New Testament, Old Testament, and also Arabic poetry, and also indicating the variations of the Quran in the footnotes, which verse has been abrogated by which one, and also the Syriac and Hebrew reading of the Quran. It's the first time such an edition has been published. It's almost finished. I hope from now until the end of this year, I will be finishing this text, which is available from now, with my French, English, and Italian translations adapted to my Arabic edition. The purpose of this edition is to present a chronological Quran. It is not the present style of Quran, so you have a chronological order which can help people to understand better. You see, every verse has an indication whether it is Meccan or if it is from Hijra time. From Hijra time, you see every verse it has an indication. You have here in red for the footnotes, and here indications for translation and also references and appropriations. I wanted just to present this book. And for those interested on circumcision, as you spoke about circumcision, maybe I wrote the largest book on circumcision in Arabic, French, and English. Legal, religious, medical, and social debate among Jews, Christians, and Muslims. All these books, all my books, I wrote almost 70 books. I wrote almost 70 books in different languages. All my books are free of charge. You can order them at Amazon, but it is not necessary. And also I published all the books of Abuna Joseph Qazi, Abu Musa al-Hariri. I got the permission to produce all his books on academia. I have the permission to produce them. You can download them. He published more than 40 books, which are very difficult to access. So you have them on my academia page. I don't like to speak alone. I would like people to intervene if they are interested. The problem that our channel is mainly in Arabic. Although there are some interviews or videos in English, in French, in Italian, or in and so on. But I think this is the second night that we present a conference in English. And it's a very good beginning. And we welcome you again to come. Mainly our colleague who is specialist on Islamic law or on the Quranic studies. I don't know exactly what he wrote, what is his field of interest. Just to inform you.
Ask a question.
Yes, just 1 second. I wrote a book on the fundamentals of Islamic law in English, Italian, and French. About 500 pages. It is available also free of charge. Please, now you can ask the question if you like.
Do you or Hisham know, is there in one cover a Quran that uses Rawayat Qursh, Rawayat Warsh, Rawayat al-Qalun, and
you mean all together?
Yeah,
I understand what you say. You find on internet there is a website which gives about 20 lectures, 20 readings. Yeah. Every verse is compared to others inside this website. I think there is one edition in Arabic, but it gives the variation in a column, not in my book. In the introduction of my book, I compared Hafs with Qalun. The main differences between both readings. So you may see, as I told you, the introduction is very large one in Arabic. Almost 160 pages. And I wrote a book, Introduction to Linguistic Errors in the Quran, in Arabic and in French. You can have it. It is free of charge. I would invite also all those who participated in that chat to intervene. I don't know why our guests disappeared. I hope they will come back. I hope they will come back. I hope they don't have technical problems. أدعو جميع الحاضرين على الشات أو من يريد منكم أن يتدخل لكي يطرح الأسئلة. أنا سوف أبعث الدعوة مجددا إلى ضيوفي الأعزاء لكي يتدخلوا من جديد. لماذا هم اختفوا؟ أخي هنا اختفوا تماما. لا أدري ماذا حدث في الواقع. لا سوف أكتب لهم لماذا اختفيتم من الشاشة. لماذا اختفيتم من الشاشة؟ إذا أنا بعثت له رسالة. لا أعرف إن يريد. هنا مجددا. هم هنا مجددا. You are welcome again. Thank you for coming again. Okay, so please, Hamid bin Hamad would like to intervene.
Okay.
He speaks excellent English, better than me, but certainly not better than Shakespeare. So, but you are welcome, Mr. Hamid. Thank you for your presence. Thank you. Please ask your question. Open the microphone. Mr. Hamid, please intervene. Yes.
Good evening, everybody. I can't be as good as you, Mr. Sami. I am only your student. I just learning some English, some German, some French, some. I like to learn. That's why and I am very sorry. I just come in home and saw your show. Then I didn't hear what you said before, so I'll stay later and maybe I can speak, because till now I didn't hear what was said before.
Jade Mumtaz.
Thank you, our friend Hamid. You know, this is a small channel with about 82,000 subscribers. 82,000 subscribers with more than 2,000 videos. So we welcome you again. We would prefer that people speak Arabic but I think as expert of Islamic law, certainly you can speak fluently Arabic, and so people can learn. The purpose of our channel is to give the possibility for people to express their opinions. For those who don't have a channel, I say our channel is the voice of those who don't have voice. And they come, in fact, in our channel, and they learn how to speak, how to hear each other, how to have a good dialogue between others.
So why is it today you didn't قدم لنا الشراب؟
الشراب نعم على صحتكم على صحتكم. Yes, in some videos I do that. I don't do any more that one because I thought it was sufficient. I did it in more than 1,000 videos. I said, okay, so I don't like to exaggerate, as you know, one should never exaggerate, but
okay, well, I was looking forward to it.
You were looking for that. I promise you, the next time you will come, I will take a bottle of wine and I will drink it completely. I will empty the bottle for you.
Do you make your own wine?
No, I just mix wine with rosemary or something else, which is very good wine. It's a very simple wine. I buy generally the cheapest one. You see, I am a poor man. Poor man, but this is not a problem. I have a question to our friend in Islamic law, if you allow me. What is your field of interest in Islamic law? Are you interested? Are you writing on Quran, on fundamentals, or in Islamic law, and so on? Just to tell you, who am I? I was responsible for Arab and Islamic law in the Swiss Institute of Comparative Law during 29 years.
أنا عرفتك أنت معروف تقريبا مشهور أنت.
شكرا. فين مشهور؟ في قناتي أم في أمريكا؟
في أمريكا وأنا أقول and you have a really good sense of humor.
Yes, we try.
سخرية شوية. ولكن أنا أحسبك عبقري.
نعم. على فكرة نحن نقدم صباحا حلقة الساعة 6 وحلقة مساء الساعة 8 كل يوم حلقتين. كل يوم حلقتين. So
the first time I saw you, you were on the Black Ducks program.
Yes, that's correct. That was the first time.
That's the first time I saw you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that made a good impression on me. I thought, wow, how do Alim?
We should excommunicate him, because he had a good impression of you. There's
no problem.
He's a Messi, sir. He's a Messi.
Nabi. In Arabic here in this channel, people are used to call me the Prophet Sami.
Yes, I heard.
I have the title of the Prophet Sami. But you see, I don't pretend infallibility, and I am not the last prophet. I opened the door for all people to become prophets. You see, and I wrote an article that we need now to have a new prophets. So we ask people to present candidates.
Very close to calling you Al-Qasis Abuna.
Abuna. No, I am not. I wanted to be a priest. I wanted to be a priest, but they expelled me. You see, they, because when I was 14 years old, they found me a dangerous person or a normal person. They wrote that this child is abnormal. Keep him in your village. This is what they wrote to my to the priest of my village. And so I finished. Okay, I am now a lawyer. Yes, and I taught Islamic law and Arabic law in many universities as a guest professor in Italy, in France, and in Switzerland. So what is your field of interest?
أنا مجرد قسيس مبشر بسيط.
But بالإسلام شو اهتمامك بالإسلام؟
أنا حيث كنت في المغرب كان واجب علي أتعلم لغتهم وثقافتهم وكذلك شيئا دينهم, right?
نعم.
So I went over بدون أدنى معرفة في الدين الإسلام.
نعم.
وكم المرة يعني مرارا وتكرارا قالوا لي واجب عليك تكون مسلم. So I said, okay, قنعني, and if you can, then I'll become a Muslim.
I have been asked, as you have been asked to become a Muslim. And I said, okay, I have conditions. If you accept my conditions, I will become a Muslim. So I give 6 conditions. The first thing, that they accept my idea that the Quran was written by a crazy rabbi. This is the first condition. They must accept this idea. The second, that they allow me to drink wine. The third condition, that they don't impose me prayer. Fourth condition, that they don't impose me Ramadan. And the last condition, that they allow me to come and to go outside without any consequences. And also, why not? They should pay me money, but in that case, if I go back, they should not take the money from me. And one condition more, I said I will become Muslim in the evening and go out from Islam in the morning. So these are my conditions. If they accept these conditions, I will become Muslim.
So you didn't say I don't want circumcision, so they can.
Yes, because I consider circumcision as a crime. I wrote the largest book on circumcision in 3 languages: French, English, and Arabic, with an introduction, the foreword by Nawal Saadawi.
Yes.
She wrote it. Yes, it is. Maybe this is the largest book on circumcision.
Yeah.
This is the largest one. So I consider it as a crime. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you come to Morocco, I can get a blind faqih to circumcise you.
So please, I delegate you to be circumcised instead of me. I don't like that.
Brother, if you learn Maghriban, if you learn Maghriban language, you can talk with it, because everybody here understand Moroccan language. So there's a lot of Moroccan with us in a channel. If you need to speak Moroccan, you can do it, and everybody can understand you.
Yeah. Yes, you know, the majority of Moroccans are the main group hearing my channel. I don't know why. I have 18% of all my auditors are from Morocco. 18%. And I don't know really why Moroccans love me. And I am always happy to have people from Morocco. And we discuss freely, as you know. I am Christian. Yes, please.
I don't know why they like you so much, but I can tell you that a lot of Moroccans have a deep sense of need to investigate.
Yes, that's right. This may explain why many Moroccans come to my channel. You know, I have been in Morocco many times, and once I loved a Moroccan girl, you know, and I went to the Ministry of Justice to see. I wanted to meet somebody in the ministry, and on the wall it was written, "What are the conditions? What are the conditions to get married with a Moroccan girl?" There were two conditions. The first, I have to present a certificate that I became Muslim. The second one, I have to present a certificate that I am circumcised. These are the two only conditions.
Oh.
It was written on the wall.
Terrible.
So I immediately left the ministry. Yeah. I said, if they take me, they will.
عندي اقتراح طريف. اوكي، بما انه بنحكي بالعربي، اقتراح طريف. دارل عنده خبرة بالمغرب وموضوع الجن والسحر بالمغرب، وعائشة كنديشة. ليش ما بنعمل حلقة عن الجن والسحر بالمغرب باللغة العربية؟
جميل، أنا أتفق.
وممكن أنت حضرتك تلاقي مغاربة يحكوا بالموضوع مع دارل، نعملها انترناشونال.
تمام. وأنا درست الموضوع أيضا. أوكي. أنا درست الموضوع، لي مقال عن الجنس في الإسلام والعلاقات الجنسية مع الجن.
هل موجود على الأكاديمية؟ لأنه أنا بيهمنا الموضوع كثير.
نعم، موجود بالفرنسي وبالإنجليزي.
أوكي، عظيم.
نعم، حوالي 40 صفحة.
Wonderful.
I think Mohammed Zafzaf wrote a story about that.
Okay. So, if nobody would like to intervene to ask my guests, I think we have now 1 hour 30 minutes past. We can stop here, and then I will give you the floor to our friend Shihab, who will say the last words. How we call it, Miskul Khitam. He will say goodbye for our listeners, and we welcome you again whenever you like. And the channel is yours. You will be always welcome. The floor is for you. تفضل.
شكرا. بما انه صبور مشغول فراح احكي بالعربي لانه ثلاثتنا بنفهم عربي.
ارجو خليه يسكت الاخر لانه صوته مسموع.
اذا بتبعدوا شوي عن
خليه يسكت. خليهم يسكتوا.
بتبعدوا شوي عن If you can, Syed, can you go out a little bit away from to talk? Okay. نحن يعني متشكرين جدا لدكتور سامي على رحابة.
Please let them be silent, otherwise we don't understand you.
miss you. نشكر الدكتور سامي الديب على رحابة صدره على فتح القناة للرأي الآخر. نحن بموضوعنا اليوم ما كنا عم نحاول إهانة حدا، لكن نحن دايما ديدنا البحث عن الحقيقة، وكذلك يعني هذا موضوع مهم جدا. و زمان برنارد لويس اللي ممكن كتير الناس ما بتحبه، لكن كان عالم كبير بالدراسات الإسلامية، قال في الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا الله يمشي على الأرض، يعني بما معناه أنه موضوع الإسلام والقرآن وكل ما يتعلق بذلك موضوع هام جدا جدا، وهو جزء من الهوية. ولذلك أنا شايف أنه دكتور سامي الديب كرس باقي حياته للقرآن والدراسات الإسلامية، لأنه بحر واسع. فنحن كل هدفنا أنه نفتح العقول والقلوب، ونحن كتير سعيدين ومنتظرين إذا بتحبوا تكتبوا تعليقات بالعربي أو بالإنجليش أو بالفرنسي على الحلقة هيدا، ممكن نجاوب عليها لاحقا. شكرا.
شكرا أخي شهاب على مداخلتك، وأشكر ضيوفك الكرام. فقط للتنبيه، غدا صباحا الساعة 6 عندي حلقة أنا سأعملها، عنوانها يسألني عن آية لكي يلحد إن أقنعته. هذا مقال كنت قد كتبته، سوف أقدمه غدا. وغدا مساء عندنا حلقة عن الغزو الإسلامي للهند، أعظم إبادة جماعية في التاريخ. إذا غدا مساء الغزو الإسلامي للهند. إذا موضوعين غدا سأقدمهما أنا، ولكن من يريد أن يتدخل غيرنا فأهلا وسهلا به، فليكتب لي. أنا عنواني الواتساب، الواتساب تاعي متوفر لديكم، يمكنكم أن تكتبوا لي وسوف أرد عليكم هنا. هذا هو رقم الواتساب تاعي. من يريد أن يكون ضيفي فليكتب لي ويحدد اليوم والموضوع. وأهلا وسهلا بك أخي شهاب وبضيوفك الكرام وكل من يريد أن يتدخل. أنهي هذه الحلقة متمنيا لكم وقتا سعيدا، وإلى لقاء قريب. دمتم على خير. ابقوا معي على الخط أخي هشام، ابقى معي على الخط.